Tejas. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, Nick. We are recording this session as well to be shared with folks that aren't able to make it. So just as an FYI, my colleague Nick has just hit record. My name is Malia Tejas. I serve as a Senior Assistant Director for Regional Recruitment at the University of Oregon. So I'm actually physically based in Portland, Oregon, and I work with students who attend high school in Multnomah and Clackamas counties. So I have been in higher ed for about 11 years working in college admission, and I'm really excited to talk a little bit about the Common App today. I'm not here to encourage anyone to apply to the U of O necessarily, more speaking generally about the Common App, but I can definitely answer questions about the U of O as well. So I'm going to pass things off to my colleague Nick to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Malia. Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Albanese. I'm the Regional Associate Director of Admissions for the University of Rochester, located in Rochester, New York. I am based in Southern California, but I cover the Pacific Northwest. So I will be traveling to Oregon and Washington this fall. And I have my contact information here if any questions come up about the U of R, but I'll turn it over back to Malia.
All right, and we're getting some comments here in the chat. This is super helpful. So we've got some seniors, we've got parents of seniors, a couple of juniors as well. That's wonderful. So hopefully this information is helpful to you regardless of where you're at in the process of getting ready to apply for colleges. And I think sometimes it's just helpful to know what to expect because the Common App is a tool that's so widely used across the country. So there are over 1,000 institutions that are on the Common App. And essentially to kind of what we're going to cover today in the presentation is we're really going to be looking in particular at the two tabs that you'll be working to fill out when you use the Common App. But the benefit of the Common App is that so many universities use it as their application platform to apply to their institutions. So for example, once you start completing a Common App, there is one common section that goes to all universities, and then universities who are on the Common App have supplemental sections that you can fill out that will just go to that school. So we'll kind of walk you through some of the different areas of this, how to get started in the Common App. And overall, I think the important thing to know about the benefit of the Common App is it can be a time saver. If you are considering, applying to a handful of schools and all of them use the Common App, then that's great. You just have to do one common section that covers most of the content and then any supplemental information that those colleges may require that's different from what's in the Common App. So we'll talk a little bit about that along the way. So you'll see, oh, sorry, Nick, do you mind going back to that last slide? Thank you. So when you first log into the Common App, and actually maybe, Nick, would you mind throwing in the chat a link to the Common App just for anybody who doesn't have it? When you first log into the Common App, these are the tabs that you see at the top. And the two that we, spend the most time in filling out, of course, is the Common App itself, which has an arrow above it, and then the My Colleges section, which is where you'll do any of that supplemental information for any of the colleges. All right, and we can go to the next one. So we're going to talk about the Common App. So we're going to go through the sections of the Common App first and just kind of talk through the different areas that you fill out. So the first section is the profile section. This is basic information about you, your name, of course, pronouns, preferred name. The next section you'll fill out is family information. This is information for us to know. For example, we'll ask about your parents' level of education or your guardian's level of education. So do they have an associate's degree? Do they have a bachelor's degree? Will you be the first in your family to be going to college? And sometimes this can help colleges and universities identify if you are a first generation student or maybe eligible for some additional financial aid if you're the first in your family to go to college. Then the next section is education. So this is where we will ask you to share some information about your educational history. The testing section is about test scores, of course, AP, IB, testing if you are taking the SAT or the ACT, if that's a required section. We'll also ask about activities that you participated in high school. There is, of course, the writing section. That's where you'll complete the required Common App essay, additional information, and sometimes the courses and grades section is required. So we'll go through each of these briefly here. So if you don't mind, Nick, going to the next slide. This is the profile. This is the information that's asked for in the profile section. So this is your basic contact information. One thing I always like to tell students is it's really important to use contact information that you will be checking regularly. So when we ask for an email address, make sure you're putting something down that you know that you'll be able to access throughout the entirety of your application cycle. Like, for example, don't put an able address down that you never check. Don't put an email address down that you might not have access to in a couple of months, that kind of thing, because that's how you'll communicate about you'll receive communications about your application. There, of course, we'll ask about gender, preferred pronouns, race, ethnicity, and then the citizenship questions are also important to pay attention to, because in the citizenship section, that is how the Common App identifies if you should be classified as an international student, or also if you are undocumented, DACA status in the US, that is where you can choose to self-disclose that information if you would like, to ensure that your application is processed correctly from the universities you're applying to. And that typically means, you know, if you are an undocumented or DACA student, schools can determine if they're going to process your application as an international applicant or as a domestic applicant, and kind of go from there. So, and then we also, of course, ask about languages. So is English your first language? What is your the first language spoken in your home? Just to give us context to that as well. So to take a look at this on the Common App, Nick, do you have the Common App pulled up that you're able to share?
Sure, yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Share that screen. So has this switched over to the Common App screen?
Yeah, perfect. Great. Okay, so this is the profile section that Nick is sharing here. So you'll see this is kind of where, this is really what it looks like in the Common App, really very similar to the screenshot we shared, but this is kind of asking you that general profile information. The one thing I do also want to know about this profile section, do you mind clicking on the Common App fee waiver link there? Perfect. So if you are a student or family member that has demonstrated financial need, which means, you know, you meet any one of the criteria or more listed here, then you can indicate that you would like to receive a fee waiver. And really all that you have to do is select, yes, I meet this criteria. You want to certify that it's accurate, and then you should be eligible to have your application fee waived to universities. So that's important to note. It is something that is really reserved for families and students with financial need. So just keep that in mind. But otherwise, if you don't select that you are eligible for the fee waiver, then you'll have a payment option at the end of the application. All right, so jumping back to the next section. So family information is what comes next. So again, I was mentioning, you know, this is some of the information we use to determine, hey, are you a first generation student? Have your parents or guardians attended college? Did they graduate from college? Do you have other siblings in college? And what is your family's, your parents or guardians' education level, and what position do they hold, like as far as a job? So it just helps give us some context to your home life background. And Nick, if you don't mind just popping back over to the Common App, we can show them what that looks like in the Common App.
Yes. Clicking on the next tab here.
Perfect. There we go. And so this just helps us, again, have some context to the what you've experienced in your home life. And colleges and universities can, again, use this to determine, you know, for example, if you are a first generation student, if you have a lot of siblings in school, it just gives us context to what challenges you may have faced, or, you know, what kind of support you have at home as well. So the next section, and maybe, I don't even know that we need to jump back to the PowerPoint. Maybe you just want to click on education there, Nick. Thanks. So this is where you want to indicate where you are attending high school. So it does ask for your current school. One thing we see very commonly is students that have attended multiple schools. You might have attended one and then transferred to another. And so we just basically want to make sure we know where you've attended high school, like where you'll have academic history from. And you can list out, multiple schools, and then where are you graduating from, where are you graduating high school from. And so if you are, and again, if you're graduating early, which is another common thing we see, maybe student graduating within 3 years instead of 4, you can indicate that there. And that's helpful for us to know. So we understand that you're not applying as a junior in high school, you're actually graduating. The next section, you'll be able to indicate any other high schools that you've attended if you did switch schools. College and universities, this section can be a little confusing to students because it doesn't mean that you're applying as a transfer student. A lot of students in high school have done dual enrollment, but it is something that we want to know if you have attended or if you've earned credit at a college or university. This is important for us to know here too. One, so that we know that you've challenged yourself academically, but also so we know to request transcripts from those schools so that we can give you the credit for the college courses you took. And then so this is information that you can put in. Not all of this is required information, but it does help us to have a sense of course, what your GPA is, if your school does a class ranking. This is all information that you can get from your high school transcripts. So when you're filling out the education section of the Common App, we definitely recommend that you have a copy of your unofficial transcripts with you. That will really help you in filling this section out. The one area in this that I do also want to highlight is the current or most recent year courses. So this is something that is required as a part of the Common App. You do have to list your senior year schedule, basically. So that is something that you want to make sure you know when you're applying. If you're not totally sure and you just know, hey, I'm taking English, but I don't know what the English course is, you can be a little bit vague about that. Schools might ask you to clarify, but it is helpful to know what your senior year schedule is when you fill this out, because we want to know what you're taking. And then, some of those, this is if you have taken any honors related courses, you can indicate that in this section. And then there are a couple other fields. The future plans is where you can list prospective majors, career interests, and that kind of thing. That can sometimes help us identify you for whether you need to apply separately to a program that we offer on one of our campuses, or if you may be eligible for a scholarship that we offer specific to a certain major, for example. So that's kind of a really pretty brief overview of the education section. I do want to highlight, while we're talking about education, just the courses and grades section, if it's okay to jump down to that. Nick, so, the courses and grades on the left-hand side in the Common App. Perfect. So some schools require the courses and grades section. Once you add schools to your college's list, like, hey, I'm going to apply to the U of O and I'm going to apply to the University of Rochester, it'll tell you if this section is required for that school. At the U of O, we do require the courses and grades section. And basically what it is you have to take your transcripts and enter every course you took in high school line by line and the grade you received in that class. So if this section is required, it is really important for you to have your transcript, fill it out accurately line by line, and then kind of go from there. And that's something that will depend, it's not a required section of the Common App. It's only sometimes required by certain schools.
And then would you say that's kind of similar to the University of Washington in that, the students are entering in their grades? So on the admissions end, you're not looking at the transcript necessarily. You're going to just look at what the student reported. And then if they choose to go to you or the UW or other colleges that do that, then they require the transcript.
Right. Thank you for clarifying. Yes, it's basically replacing a student sending in their transcript when they apply. It's like you basically reporting your transcript instead of sending us a physical copy. So it is, and it's also referred to as like a self-reported academic record or digital transcript. There's a lot of ways we refer to it, but it is important to be accurate in this section, because You don't want to fill this out and correctly be awarded a scholarship. And then you're like, oh, wait, actually, my GPA was a lot lower than what I entered, and then not be eligible in the long run. So it is important to take a lot of care in doing this section. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And then the last section I'll just mention here is the testing. So we are at a different time in college admission. I'm sure Nick and I could both speak to the days when everybody required SAT or ACT, but especially since COVID, this has changed quite a bit across the country. So you may or may not have to send in official SAT or ACT scores depending on the universities you're applying to. For example, when U of O used to require test scores, you did have to send in an official score report from the College Board or the ACT that told us what your test scores were. Since we no longer require test scores, that's optional. And many institutions are the same, but this is a section where you can self-report tests if you've taken them. So not just SAT or ACT, but also AP, IB. If you're an international applicant, you've taken the TOEFL or Duolingo English test. It's a place where you can self-report scores, but it's important to know some schools don't accept self-reported scores. Like you can put them in here and that's like, okay, great, we know what the score is, but you may have to send official score reports from the testing agency for it to count. So that's something to check with the schools that you're applying to, if that's the case. But Nick is kind of going through here the testing section so you can kind of get a sense of what that is. And this is where you would enter the information from any tests you've taken. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. All right, and now at this point, I'm going to hand things over to Nick, and Nick is going to talk a little bit about the activities section.
My pleasure. Thank you. So the Common Application lets you list up to 10 activities. And so we can see if we say, yes, I have some activities I want to report, you'll see activity 1, and then they all pretty much look like this as you add activity 2, 3, 4, and so on. You can start with the type of activity, and there's a lot of different types here. So, I would encourage you to try to kind of see if the type of activity fits into this versus clicking the other, but there is the option to say other if you just can't find that type of activity. You then put in what your position was, and if you had a leadership role. So, you could say that you were the president of that organization, for example. That's helpful to be specific there because a lot of us do look to see if students are getting active in their organizations, if they're taking on those leadership roles. Sometimes that can lead to higher scholarships or an opportunity to get connected with some kind of leadership organization at the college. So definitely be specific about that. Maybe if your organization doesn't have a formal title, or if you don't have a formal title in your org, you can kind of talk to the person running it, the teacher that's helping you with the group or that kind of thing, and just say, hey, how would you describe the role that I have here? Would you say this is equivalent to a leader in this organization? Is it okay to say that? So being specific about what your role was, the name of the organization. So let's say it's like the yearbook club. Some schools will have acronyms, like maybe it's like the YC or that kind of thing. So just try to be specific there, type out the name of the full name of the club, and then you can put if there's an abbreviation, after it, because not all of us, will know what these clubs are on our end, on the college end. You have about as many characters here to describe the activity as you do to compose a tweet. So you want to be specific. I suggest trying to write about some of the skills that you learn. So, if it's a yearbook, for example, you can say, learns Adobe Photoshop and, learned how to work with a team on deadlines or that sort of thing. But just talking about, some of the what meaning you got out of the activity and why it was important enough to list it here. You write the grades that you participated in the activity, talk about the timing, whether it was during the school year or another time, hours spent per week. Try to be realistic with this. Sometimes we look at activities for students and they write more hours than there are in a week for all of their activities. So, but if it is a significant amount of time, then just kind of put what that is. and the number of weeks per year that you're involved in it, and if you want to be involved in college. Some other tips about activities, I think students assume that they can only write about activities that take place during the school day or are hosted by your school. But we definitely encourage you to talk about work experience. So if you have a second job, volunteer experience that you have outside of school, if you have family responsibilities, maybe you care for a younger sibling, maybe you have an elderly grandparent living with you or that kind of thing, you can absolutely list those as activities. So don't be shy about listing things that you're involved in where you learned a skill or that taught you something about life that you think are important for us to know about you, on the college application. Malia, anything you'd want to add about activities? Or
I think that was great. I think you really covered the bulk of it.
Awesome. So next up, we have the writing section. And so there is going to be a personal essay. Not all colleges require the Common Application essay. So as you add your list of colleges, it'll say whether, for example, so I have Rochester on my list and it says it's required. Other schools, it may not be required, but the Common Application has a standard essay, and it is one of these 7 prompts. So some students have a background, identity, or interest that's so meaningful to them, they believe their application would be incomplete without it. Or you could talk about lessons and obstacles that you've encountered, reflecting on a time where you questioned or challenged a belief. I actually really like that question. I used to work for a Catholic institution, and I almost never saw a student choose that question. So I would have loved to see more of that. Curious, Malia, if you see more of that on your end working for a secular institution. And reflect on something you've done that has made you happy or thankful in a surprising way. Just kind of talking about some mindfulness there, discussing an accomplishment, event, or realization that sparked a period of personal growth, describing a topic, idea, or concept that you find so engaging that you lose all track of time, or kind of that concept of finding your flow. And then finally, you can share a topic of your own choice. So if you feel like none of these topics I just mentioned fit, or maybe you have an essay that you love and you feel really represents you and you want to have that, be your college essay, you can do a topic of your own choice as well. All of these topics have little pitfalls and little sand traps that students sometimes get into, and we actually will have an entire additional presentation on the college essay. I believe that's coming up this afternoon, or at some point this week, and we'll have a recording of that if you can't make it. So we won't go too deeply into that. But just to say that you want to take your time with this, you have up to 650 words. I suggest typing this in, Word or Google Docs and saving it a bunch of times before you try to put it in here. I wouldn't try to type it in this box because, you just in case you lose your work or your browser resets or that kind of thing. And then when you paste it into this box, just make sure that, the formatting looks correct, that you're still within the word count, because you don't want your writing to get cut off, or you don't want us to kind of have any difficulty reading this. And then in addition to that, there are 2 other writing sections that are optional. You can say if COVID-19 has affected your experience in high school, especially if it's affected your grades. This is a good place to talk about that. It's not just COVID-19, it's also other natural disasters. So things like wildfires or floods, anything that kind of took you out of school and was, not a man-made thing, in nature. You can describe, how that impacted you there. Then there's also this box where you can provide additional details. So I kind of think about this box as if, let's say there's something, you look at all these other sections of the Common Application, the activities, the family information, the writing section, and you still feel like there's information that you want someone reading your application to know. This is kind of like your chance to speak directly to us, this text box. So it's not required, but maybe you have a C+ in math class in freshman year, and that was a really hard year for you. A grandparent passed away that was living with you, and or your family had some major change in financial circumstances that year, and whatever it was, there was some kind of outside influence that affected your grades, for example. So that would be this would be a good place to kind of talk about that, and if you feel comfortable sharing that information, but you don't have to use that box. It's just there if you would like to use it. Some colleges will also ask for additional supplemental writing prompts. Usually that's kind of the why us question, like, why are you picking this institution? And you'll see that when you select your college, they'll have their own sets of questions there as well. But these are just sort of questions that every school that uses the Common Application has the option to use and to see. I think we talked about courses and grades as well. So now I believe I can bring it back to the presentation. And then we talked a little bit about, ways to stand out with those activities. We talked a little bit about that as well. Other attributes or rewards. So if you have, some academic honors, you can list that on the Common Application. So that's a good place to put that. Again, we talked about not using acronyms. We went over the essay sections. And so those are the standard Common Application questions. Those are things that, again, that all of the Common Application colleges will see. Then once you pick the colleges on your list on that Common Application, you add them to your list. All of those colleges are going to have some additional questions, things that are specific to their institution. So it's typically things like, what do you want to study here? Are you going to apply for financial aid? Do you want to be test optional? So if a college is test optional, they'll ask you typically on their supplement here, do you want to submit your test scores to us? Do you want them to be considered in the admissions process? And so that's where you'll have those supplemental questions. That's a great opportunity to demonstrate your interest for that college. We all have Google, right? So if you do have the why us question, if you have the why Oregon or the why Rochester question, read our mission statement. Go online and Google our mission statement. Think about what some of your values are, and try to understand what the priorities and the values of the college you're applying to are, and see how those match up, and maybe that can be something to write about. Mention some specifics. If there's a major that has a unique name that you really love, or a department that seems interesting, or professors of research, that's a good place to mention some specifics there and show us that we're not just another college that you're adding to your list, but we're really a place that you genuinely want to apply to and that you have some interest in. There's also a disciplinary history section. This might be going away in the future. I believe that's one of the updates with the Common Application, whether this will even be there or whether colleges will choose to use it or not. But if you have any disciplinary infractions, anything that's on your record in high school, just be sure to talk to your college counselor about that, and they'll help you strategize when you fill out your application. And then recommendation letters. So not all colleges require recommendation letters. Some colleges will just require one from a counselor. Some will require a counselor and a teacher. Some will require 2 teachers. It really varies, but that will all be listed out when you choose that college and you add it to your list on the Common Application. And so you just want to make sure that you're giving those recommenders plenty of time for you to ask for their letter, that you kind of remind them why you're choosing them. Don't be afraid to let them know, some examples of why you pick them and things that you think they might write about you. Doesn't mean you can guarantee what they are going to write, but just kind of, reminding them, hey, this is why I'm picking you. And so, we talked about there's different requirements with that, multiple letters and that sort of thing. Another thing I think Malia actually is going to talk about more about this next part, but anything else with recommendations, Malia, that you wanted me to stay on that slide with? Or
I was actually going to share, I found this, I think that this PDF is helpful from the Common App. It just helps you to understand the recommendation process a little bit. So I wanted to share that out. And, I would just say, a lot of schools it really depends if a school requires letters of rec or not. And if they are required, they just really are recommended to come from academic sources. So I know a lot of students will reach out to me and say like, hey, can I submit a letter of rec from my coach or, from somebody in the community? Those can be helpful. But typically we are if, and you may want to check with the institution you're applying to, or they might specifically outline it, but typically it's much more helpful to hear them come from academic sources, teachers, counselors, that kind of thing. And, highlighting some of the things Nick said, like really give them as much time as possible when you're requesting those. You also might say, oh, I'm not applying to a school that requires letters of rec, so I'm not going to ask for any. It can actually be helpful just to have some, even if you're not applying to schools that require letters of rec, because, for example, at U of O, we don't require them for admission, but some of our scholarships do. So you may need them later on, and you don't want to be scrambling to pull those together. So it can help to have them kind of in your back pocket too. That'd be the only other thing I'd add there. And then I do want to take a minute to talk about Ferpa. Ferpa refers to the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. That's a handful of words. But what that is it's a federal law that basically regulates the privacy of students' educational records. So that also includes your application to the college that you enroll in, or that you apply to enroll in. Ferpa, as a general rule, it doesn't apply to students until they actually begin taking classes at the institution, but there are documents that Ferpa protects through the admissions process. So one of those things is your application and your letters of recommendation. So when you are applying through the Common App, you're going to get a question that asks you about your Ferpa rights. And this is one that often confuses students. They're like, I don't really know what I'm waiving here. But basically what the application is asking is, do you want to waive the right to review confidential letters of recommendation? So what this is saying is, if you go to your high school counselor and you ask them for a letter of recommendation and you've waived your right to review it, that means they can send us a letter of recommendation without you reading it. That is typically the preferred method for most recommenders. To be able to submit an honest and truthful recommendation about a student, they're typically preferring that they can send it confidentially. So if there is something that they want to share about, their experience with you as a student, that's confidential between the university and the recommender. So that does also kind of, that's where you want to make sure you're asking people to recommend you who know you really well, who can speak to your strengths, who can speak to what you would add to the institution. And if it's somebody, if you're like, I need a letter of recommendation, and I'm just going to ask just anybody so I can get one, it's typically better to just not send one, because you want to make sure that you're, connecting with somebody who can really speak to your strengths and knows you. Because if you do waive your right, you're not going to, of course, see what they write about you. In some cases, if you say, I'm not going to waive my right, that is your right to say that. It's your right to say, I will not waive my right to review confidential letters of recommendation, but it would mean that the recommender would be notified that you will be reading their recommendation. And in that case, they may choose to not write one. They might prefer that it remain confidential. So it's important. It's important to know that's an option when you apply. And if you do, like what we put in here at the end, if you're not sure how to respond to that, if you need to think it through a little bit more, talk to your parents, your guardians, your counselor, somebody at the school to get some insight about Ferpa, because it's going to continue to come up throughout your education, where you'll have to make decisions about who you want to give access to your educational records about. All right. I know that's a lot of information. I feel like we covered a lot. There's a lot more we can dive into, but that was hopefully a really helpful overview of what to expect when you're working on the Common App. The big thing to really know is, I think sometimes thinking about a college application can be daunting. It's like, oh my gosh, you hear about it so much, there's all this buildup. But the truth is, a lot of the information that you're going to be putting in this application are things that you already know. It's information that, you want to take time and be thoughtful in what you put into these applications, because colleges will be reading it. But at the same time, this is for us to learn about you. So be comfortable to share things about yourself, to let us know things about you that we wouldn't otherwise know, by just sending in your transcripts, and take advantage of the opportunity, as this is a platform for you to really kind of highlight what you want colleges and universities to know. I don't know, Nick, would you add anything else to that before we take questions?
And while we're talking, please feel free to put your questions in the chat, or once we say our final statements, feel free to raise your hand, unmute. We can definitely have a discussion. I would just add that before you even start the application, just think about this as an opportunity to really think about what you want your future to be like. So much of your life in high school, so many things have been, kind of chosen for you, the path that you've been on. And this is really that first big step towards adulthood of, finding that independence, thinking about what your priorities are, what you want to learn, what environment you want to be in, what places are going to make you thrive and make you come alive and make you be your best self. And so the application, this is kind of that first step about thinking about, what have been the most meaningful activities to me, not just that I was involved in things to check a box, and not just to list 10 versus listing 8 to have a higher quantity than other students. Because on our end, it doesn't matter if you have 3 activities or 10, but just that, were those activities really meaningful to you? Did they really, change you in some way? And then when we're reading your application, we can think, yes, like I can see why they were involved in that, or I can see why that would have been such a cool activity for them. Similar with the essay, rather than trying to write about what you think we want to hear, right, just sharing your voice, sharing a story, giving us a little insight into you, almost like we're watching like a Netflix video about you, right? And a little like snippet of your life, and giving us a sense of your personality. Because on our side, on the college side, we don't want to just read a bunch of text on a screen all day. We really want your application to come alive, and we want to get a sense of you as a person. We don't always have an opportunity to meet you in person before we are able to admit you to our schools. So that's really that chance for your personality to shine through. And so again, like not just treating this as like steps to check off on a list, but thinking about your priorities, where you want to take this, who you want to be, and kind of almost treating this as like a fun opportunity to think about your future. And I kind of like the way that this breaks things down. I know sometimes it can feel like a chore, but if you give yourself some time, if you do this in advance, if you're a senior watching this, you can start your common application now, right? Like you can create an account today, you can get this started, you can start brainstorming your essays. The summer is a great time to do that. It's just a really nice opportunity to think about the next 4 years and be a little mindful and proactive about it. But we would love to take your questions. So feel free to type those into the chat, or like I said, raise your hand and mute yourself, however you'd like to do it. We're here for you now. So I see that we have one question. It's about parents who are separated. So the question is, if your parents are separated and you live full-time with one parent and a step-parent, would you use the step-parent's educational history information? Yes, so the Common Application allows you to say how many parents you have, what their relationship to you is, if they're your parent, if they're a step-parent, if they're a legal guardian, and then you can list their educational history, like where they went to school and how many years. And I know that kind of gets into that question of, is the student first generation? Are they the first person in their family to go to college? And I think sometimes students wonder, well, my biological parents didn't go to college, but 2 years ago, my father remarried and I live with him, and so my stepmother has a 4-year degree. So will I be counted as first gen? And that's going to vary from college to college. But I think generally our rule of thumb in our minds is, for a significant portion of your life, have you grown up in an environment where you're surrounded by people that were probably talking about their college experience, that can kind of help you with the process, that know something about it. And if you haven't, then that's helpful for us to know, because we can make sure that we get you connected with resources to make sure that it's a smooth process applying to our colleges. We have another question. What is the general deadline to fill out the Common Application? So Malia, do you want to take that one?
Yes, that's a great question. So it depends on the university you're applying to. So there's no one standard Common App deadline. there are deadlines specific to each university. So for example, if you say, I'm a student, I'm going to apply to U of O and University of Rochester, then you would want, well, first it'll list in the application, when you log into the Common App and you add those colleges to your colleges tab, it'll tell you what the deadlines are. For example, at U of O, we have an early action deadline, which is November 1st. We also have a regular deadline, which is January 15th. And for us, we tell you, hey, if you want to apply early action by November 1st, that's great. Submit your Common App to us by November 1st, and you'll just hear back from us sooner. But the regular decision deadline is the one you really don't want to miss if you want to be considered for freshman admission and scholarships. So that's going to vary institution by institution. And I'm sure Nick would have a different answer for University of Rochester. So it's really important to pay attention to the university deadlines and just know that, that they will vary. And you can submit your Common Apps, to different schools at different times. For example, you might finish the U of O supplemental section earlier than you finished the University of Rochester supplemental section. So you can submit your Common App to U of O by November 1st. And then maybe you say, well, University of Rochester doesn't have a deadline until January, so I'll work on their section later. So they don't all have to be submitted at the same time.
Yeah, and I would add to that, so the Common Application, you can start it August 1st. And so let's say you were a junior and you created an account. Your information will roll over on August 1st of your senior year, but you are going to want to make sure that you go in there and you update it. Otherwise, if you're a senior watching this, you should be good to go if you're starting now. And then another important deadline is November 1. That's when the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, opens. I'm sorry, October 1. Did I say? I meant to say October 1. So it's kind of like August 1 is the Common App, October 1 is the FAFSA, and then a lot of colleges tend to have early November deadlines, through the early spring. One tip is you can make a spreadsheet and kind of have your list of colleges on there, and you can have as many columns as you want, but you might want to have a couple columns that talk about what kind of application are you going to be applying with. Is it early action where it's not binding? Do you want to maybe apply early decision to a college that offers that? You can only choose that one time and it is binding. And what are the dates and deadlines for that type of application that you're choosing? Is there a priority financial aid deadline? So at Rochester, you can apply after December 1, but December 1 is our priority deadline for full merit scholarships. So this is a lot of information, I know, but as you build your college list, as you kind of decide, I think I'm going to apply to 7 colleges. I think I'm going to apply to 11 colleges, whatever the number is. Those are the colleges where you really want to dig in, start listing that information in an organized way, keep track of those dates and deadlines, who your admissions counselor is, try to make some contact with your admissions person. That's why Malia and I are doing this. We like interacting with you. We want to get to know our prospective students. So don't be shy, reach out to us, find out who that contact is, demonstrate interest in some kind of way. Not all colleges will officially consider that, but so whether you're, doing an interview with that college, if they offer it, or just reaching out to your counselor, but making some kind of connection with the colleges that are on your list is going to help you just kind of understand, are there any of these deadlines that I might not be aware of, like a priority financial aid deadline? Maybe there are some special scholarships that I didn't even know about that are not really on the website, but apply to me. And so those are all just good things to chat about with an admissions person.
Yeah, and Nick, we've got a question in the chat from Joaquin. It's a great question. If I graduate with my AA from Running Start, would I apply as a first year or a transfer student? And that is a really good question. And one that I hate to say it, I feel like this is the rule of thumb answer, but it does probably vary a little bit institution by institution. Now, as a general rule of thumb, most colleges and universities would say that college coursework that you've taken while still in high school does not constitute you as a transfer student. Like that's how U of O views it. So if you're enrolled, if you're taking any college classes through dual enrollment, Running Start, whatever you're doing, while you're still enrolled in high school, that's not considered transfer course. I mean, you will get the credit when you come to the U of O, you might start out as a sophomore credit wise, but we treat you as a freshman for admissions purposes, for scholarships, for housing, because we want you to have the same experience as your peer group. So in most cases, I'll say that's more common, but there may be schools that would look at your college coursework in high school as transfer coursework. So it's important to ask that question. And also how you answer the questions in the Common App will filter you the right way to the university you're applying to. So when they ask you, like, what classes have you taken? You want to make sure to put the correct start and end date for your community college classes. Because if you list your end date at the community college after your high school graduation date, that can make it look to us like you're a transfer student. Our policy at U of O is if you take one single class after high school graduation, you are a transfer student and not a freshman. But if you take everything while you're still in high school and everything's done by your high school graduation date, you're a freshman, but you may come in with the credit to be considered a sophomore. I hope that explanation makes sense. And would you add anything to that, Nick? It's a really good question because it's very common.
Oh yeah, that's a great explanation. We treat it the same way at Rochester for the same reasons. And so, if a student was in that situation, I think they would want to decide, well, I've got this associate's degree worth of credits in high school. Do I want the full 4-year experience or close to it? So at Rochester, you could transfer up to a semester's worth of those credits. So you could graduate a little early, but basically have that same 4-year experience, that residential experience, and the reason that you're applying to, or part of the reason why you're applying to a college like ours. Or do you want to maybe take a class or two after graduating, maybe in the summer or that kind of thing, so that you can apply as a transfer student and finish in 2 years and have that kind of experience. So, in some ways, it's almost like up to you if you want to take a few additional courses after graduating from high school and in order to pursue that more accelerated experience, or if you want the more 4-year kind of experience. But either way, it's a great thing that you're taking college classes in high school. We love that. First of all, it shows that you're ready to do college level work. So that's one reason why those courses are definitely valuable to you, whether or not it helps you graduate earlier. But it's preparing you for college level work. You will hopefully at least get some of the credits. And unlike APs or IBs, you don't have to take a test to have those credits. And so there's a lot of value to taking those running start courses, and we definitely appreciate seeing students that do that. And we know that you have that extra level of preparedness by doing some of those courses. I see another question here. Is UW part of the Common Application? So I believe that they are going to be added. I'm not sure if they're on there yet. I think they're going to be on it soon. I think the reason that they were not on it in the past was what Malia was talking about earlier, with needing to self-report all of those high school courses and grades instead of submitting a transcript. And so now that the Common Application lets you do that, I think they are going to be added. So right now they're on something called the Coalition application. And the Coalition, it's very similar to the Common Application. There are, I would assume probably under 300 colleges that use it. So the Common Application probably has over 600 colleges on it, and the Coalition probably has under 300. So less colleges use the Coalition, but many of those colleges commit to getting close to or meeting full demonstrated financial need. And so that's a great option to look at some of those Coalition schools if finances are a high priority for you. At Rochester, we take both the Common Application or the Coalition application. Any other questions? Anything else anyone would like us to chat about while we're here?
Well,
all right, well,
I'm going to go ahead and put my contact info in the chat here. That's a link to, if you want to just save that link somewhere. I know a number of you are from Washington. I am happy to also connect you with my colleagues who work specifically with Washington schools. If you have any questions about the U of O, I'm also happy to help. But we're also happy to help answer general questions, again, about applying to college, the Common App. We, like Nick said, we are happy to be a resource for you all, and just want to help in whatever pursuits you have for higher education. So thank you very much for being here and participating in our presentation today.
Thanks, everyone. And I just put the link as well to the other presentations that are going to be going on today. And then some of us will also have some individual meetings. So if you can meet with us, you can sign up through the link I just put in the chat this week as well.
All right. Thanks so much. Take care. Have a great day.